The blood trail in the snow wasn't supposed to lead anywhere. It wasn't supposed to matter. But at the bottom of that ravine, beneath the frozen silence of the mountains, Rowan Hale found her, broken, bleeding, and 8 months pregnant. 3 years he'd spent running from the ghosts of his past. 3 years of solitude, of numbness, of choosing emptiness over pain. He should have walked away. Every instinct screamed at him to leave her there, to protect the fragile armor he'd built around what was left of his soul. But when he felt that baby move beneath his trembling hand, everything changed. Before we begin this journey through ice and blood, through redemption and survival, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end. This is a story that will test the limits of what one man can endure and what two broken souls can build from the ashes of their shattered lives. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales travel across the world. Now, let's step into the frozen mountains where Rowan Hale's war with himself is about to end, or begin. The mountains had no mercy. They never did. Rowan Hale had learned that truth the hard way, carved it into his bones through 3 winters of isolation, 3 years of silence broken only by wind and his own ragged breathing. The cabin he'd built with his own hands sat tucked into a valley so remote that even the hunters avoided it, and that was exactly how he wanted it. No visitors, no questions, no eyes that might recognize the man he used to be. He'd become a ghost, and ghosts didn't interfere with the living. But on that particular morning, as February's brutal cold wrapped around the peaks like a fist, the mountains decided Rowan Hale had hidden long enough. The sun hadn't fully risen when he stepped outside to check his trap lines. The sky held that peculiar quality of pre-dawn light, not quite dark, not quite illuminated, suspended in a gray limbo that matched the state of his soul. His breath clouded in front of his face as he moved through snow that came up past his knees in places, following the path he'd worn through repetition and routine. Routine was everything now. Routine kept the memories at bay. Check the traps, skin whatever he'd caught, salt the meat, chop wood, melt snow for water, survive another day, repeat. He was halfway to his first snare when he saw it. Blood. Not the small spatters from a wounded rabbit or the pink-tinged snow where a fox had made a kill. This was different. This was a trail, dark arterial red against the white canvas, leading away from the main ridge and disappearing over the edge of what the locals called Devil's Drop, a ravine that plunged 60 feet straight down into a boulder field. Rowan stopped dead, his hand instinctively moving to the hunting knife at his belt. 3 years ago, he would have followed that trail without hesitation. 3 years ago, he'd been the kind of man who ran toward trouble, who believed he could fix things, save people, make a difference. 3 years ago, he'd still been human. Now he stared at the blood trail and felt nothing but the cold wind on his face. Not my problem. Whatever happened here, whoever's bleeding out in that ravine, not my problem. He turned to continue his rounds, made it 5 steps. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound so faint he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. A moan. Weak, barely human, but unmistakably there. Rowan's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. Keep walking. But his feet had stopped moving. Damn it, he muttered, the first word he'd spoken aloud in 3 days. He knew what would happen if he looked over that edge. He knew that once he saw, once he knew, the choice would be ripped away from him. There were some things even a man running from himself couldn't ignore, and a dying person calling out in the wilderness was one of them. For a long moment, Rowan stood frozen between 2 versions of himself. The man who'd walked away from everything and the man who couldn't quite kill the part of himself that still gave a damn. The moan came again, weaker this time. Son of a bitch, Rowan growled and moved toward the ravine. The blood trail was fresher than he'd first thought. Hours old, maybe less. Someone had crawled this far, bleeding heavily, then either fallen or dragged themselves over the edge. The snow near the rim was disturbed, scuffed and kicked up in patterns that spoke of struggle and desperation. Rowan dropped to his stomach and crawled to the edge, peering down into the ravine. What he saw stopped his heart. A woman lay crumpled among the boulders like a broken doll, her body twisted at angles that made his stomach turn. She wore a thick wool coat, now torn and soaked with blood. Her dark hair spread across the snow in a frozen fan. One leg was clearly shattered, bent in a way that made even Rowan, who'd seen more broken bodies than he cared to count, wince. But that wasn't what held him paralyzed at the edge of that ravine. She was pregnant. Hugely, unmistakably pregnant. "No," Rowan breathed. "No, no, no." The woman's eyes fluttered open, just barely, just enough for him to see the agony and terror swimming in their depths. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear from this distance. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to stand up, walk away, pretend he'd never seen this. There was no way she'd survive those injuries. No way the baby would make it. Getting involved meant exposure, questions, authorities, everything he'd spent 3 years avoiding. He could walk away. Should walk away. Rowan was already moving, scrambling down the side of the ravine before he'd consciously made the decision. Rocks and snow cascaded around him as he half climbed, half fell toward the broken woman below. His boots slipped on ice-covered stone. His hands scraped raw against frozen rock. None of it mattered. He reached her in less than a minute, dropping to his knees beside her shattered form. Up close, the damage was worse. So much worse. A gash across her forehead leaked blood that had already frozen in crystalline streams down the side of her face. Her left leg was definitely broken, compound fracture, bone visible through torn fabric and flesh. More blood soaked through her coat from wounds he couldn't yet see. Her breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps that spoke of internal damage. She was dying. Even if he got her to a hospital right now, she was probably dying. But her eyes found his, and in them he saw something he recognized. The absolute refusal to quit, the desperate fight to hold on just one more second, one more breath. "Please." Her voice was barely a whisper, raw and broken. "Please. My baby." Rowan's hand moved without conscious thought, pressing gently against the swell of her abdomen, and felt movement. The baby kicked against his palm, weak, sluggish, but alive. Something inside Rowan's chest cracked, not broke. It had been broken for 3 years. This was different. This was something frozen beginning to thaw, and it hurt worse than any wound he'd ever taken. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Okay, I've got you. Stay with me. You hear me? Stay with me." He needed to assess her injuries, stabilize what he could, but the ravine offered no shelter and the temperature was dropping by the minute. The woman, girl, really, she couldn't have been more than 25, was already showing signs of hypothermia. Her lips were blue. Her skin held the waxy pallor of advancing shock. If he didn't get her warm soon, neither she nor the baby would survive the hour. Rowan shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then stripped off his wool shirt despite the biting cold. He pressed the fabric against the worst of her visible wounds, trying to slow the bleeding. The woman cried out, a sound of pure agony that cut through the mountain silence like a blade. "I know," Rowan said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I know it hurts, but I need you to hold on. Can you do that for me? Can you hold on?" Her eyes, glazed with pain and shock, managed to focus on his face. She gave the tiniest nod. "Good. What's your name?" "Eliza." The word came out through chattering teeth. "Eliza Vance." "Eliza. I'm Rowan. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need to check your injuries first. This is going to hurt. I'm sorry." He worked quickly, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done battlefield triage more times than he could count. The head wound was superficial, ugly and bloody, but not immediately life-threatening. The leg was bad, very bad, but he could splint it. What worried him most was the amount of blood soaking through her coat. He opened it carefully, and his jaw tightened. Multiple stab wounds to her torso. Someone hadn't just attacked her, they'd tried to butcher her. "Who did this to you?" The question came out harder than he intended. Eliza's eyes drifted shut. Rowan shook her gently. "Hey, stay with me, Eliza. Who did this?" "My brother-in-law." Her voice was fading. "Thomas wanted the land. My husband died. Thomas said it should be his." Her words dissolved into incoherent mumbling. Rowan didn't need to hear more. He'd seen this story before, in different forms, different places. Greed wearing the mask of family. Violence dressed up as righteous claim. Did he push you over the edge? A weak nod. Where is he now? Left.
This story
Thought I
was
was
posted on the channel
dead.
West of Betrayal.
She probably
Please do not
should be.
repost it
The fact
in
that
any
she'd
form.
survived the fall at all was a miracle. The fact that she'd survived it while pregnant defied explanation. But surviving the fall and surviving the next few hours were two very different things. Rowan looked up at the ravine walls, calculating. He couldn't carry her up the way he'd come down, not with her injuries. He'd have to take the long route, through the boulder field and around to the gentler slope on the western side. In good conditions, that was a 30-minute hike. In a snowstorm, carrying a critically injured pregnant woman. With the temperature dropping below zero. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Rowan stood and began gathering materials for a makeshift splint. Okay, Eliza, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to stabilize your leg as best I can, then I'm going to carry you out of here. My cabin is about 2 miles north. I can keep you alive there until the weather clears enough to get you to actual help. But I won't lie to you. This is going to be the worst pain you've ever felt in your life. And we might not make it. Do you understand? Eliza's eyes had closed again. He shook her shoulder. Eliza, I need you to understand you have to fight. I can carry you, but you have to fight. For that baby. You hearing me? Her eyes opened, barely slits but aware. Fight, she whispered. Damn right. Now hold on to something because this is going to hurt like hell. Using branches torn from a scraggly pine and strips from his own shirt, Rowan constructed a crude splint for her shattered leg. Eliza screamed when he straightened the limb, a sound that echoed off the ravine walls and sent a flock of ravens scattering from their roosts. She passed out halfway through the process, which was a mercy. By the time he'd finished, Rowan's hands were numb and bloody. The wind had picked up, and the sky had taken on the peculiar yellow-gray tinge that preceded heavy snow. He had maybe an hour before the storm hit in earnest. He knelt beside Eliza's unconscious form and carefully, gently, lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, or perhaps adrenaline had made her weightless. Either way, Rowan stood with his burden cradled against his chest and began the long trek out of the ravine. The first 100 yards weren't terrible. The boulder field, while treacherous, was relatively flat. But then the terrain began to climb, and Rowan's muscles began to burn. Every step required careful placement. Every movement sent fresh blood seeping through Eliza's bandages. The storm hit before he made it to the slope. Snow came down in thick sheets, driven by wind that cut through Rowan's remaining clothes like knives. Within minutes, visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. The temperature plummeted. Ice began forming in Rowan's beard. He should have been miserable. Should have been questioning every decision that led to this moment. Half frozen, carrying a dying stranger through a blizzard toward a destination that seemed to retreat with every step. Instead, for the first time in 3 years, Rowan Hale felt alive. "Come on," he muttered, adjusting Eliza's weight in his arms. "Come on, you stubborn bastard. You've carried heavier. You've walked farther." The mountain disagreed. The slope seemed to steepen with every step. The snow grew deeper. Rowan's boots slipped on hidden ice. Once, he went down to one knee, catching himself at the last second before falling completely. Eliza moaned in his arms but didn't wake. He forced himself back to his feet and kept moving. Time became meaningless. There was only the next step, and the next, and the next. The storm transformed the familiar landscape into an alien world of white and gray. Twice Rowan had to stop and recalibrate, using the angle of the slope and the feel of the wind to navigate when his eyes gave him nothing useful. His arms screamed, his legs trembled, his lungs burned with every breath of frozen air. Just a little farther, just a little more. He crested the slope and nearly wept with relief. There, barely visible through the snow, stood the dark shape of his cabin. The final quarter-mile took everything he had left. By the time Rowan kicked open the cabin door and stumbled inside, his vision was tunneling and his entire body shook with exhaustion. He laid Eliza on his bed, the only bed, a narrow frame he'd built himself, and immediately began stoking the fire in the hearth. The cabin was cold, but not dangerously so. Within minutes, flames were crackling, throwing blessed heat into the single room. Only then did Rowan let himself collapse into the chair by the hearth, gasping for breath. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. Eliza was still bleeding, still dying. Rowan forced himself up and began gathering supplies. Clean water, boiled first. Strips of cloth for fresh bandages. Needle and thread. Whiskey, for sterilization, and if she woke, for the pain. His hands, usually steady, shook as he cut away Eliza's blood-soaked clothes. The stab wounds were deep, professional. Someone had known exactly where to strike for maximum damage. One had punctured her lung. Rowan could tell by the wet, bubbling quality of her breathing. Another had gone into her abdomen, dangerously close to the baby. "You magnificent, stubborn woman," Rowan breathed. "How are you even alive?" He worked through the night, stitching wounds, rebinding the leg with proper splints and bandages, monitoring her breathing, her pulse, the color of her skin. Every hour, he pressed his hand to her belly, checking for movement. The baby kicked, weakly at first, then with increasing strength as Eliza's condition stabilized. Dawn was breaking when Eliza's eyes finally opened. She stared at the rough timber ceiling for a long moment, confusion and pain warring across her features. Then her hand moved to her stomach and a sound escaped her throat, half sob, half prayer. "Still there," Rowan said from his position by the fire. "Baby's still fighting." Eliza's head turned toward his voice. In the gray morning light filtering through the cabin's single window, Rowan got his first clear look at her face. Younger than he'd thought. Dark eyes that held depths of pain no 20-something should know. A face that might have been beautiful before someone tried to destroy it. You're real," she whispered. "I thought, in the ravine, I thought I'd dreamed you." "I'm real. So are you. Against all odds." "How long?" "Oh, about 12 hours since I found you. You've been in and out, mostly out. How's the pain?" "Everything hurts." "That means you're alive. I'll take it as a good sign." Rowan stood and moved to her bedside, offering a cup of water. "Small sips. Your body's been through hell." Eliza drank greedily despite his warning, then coughed, gasping. "Easy," Rowan cautioned. "I said small sips." "My baby..." Her hand pressed against her abdomen. "Is my baby okay?" "As far as I can tell, yes. I'm no doctor, but the baby's moving, which is more than I expected given your condition. That said, you need real medical attention. Soon. I've done what I can, but those wounds..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Once this storm clears, I'll get you to town." "No!" The force of Eliza's response surprised them both. She tried to sit up, crying out as pain lanced through her broken leg. "Hey, easy." Rowan pressed her back down gently. "You can't move like that. Your leg is shattered, and you've got 6 stab wounds that I just stitched closed. You want to undo all my work?" "You don't understand." Eliza's eyes were wild now, panicked. "Thomas, he'll find me. If you take me to town, he'll finish what he started. He can't know I'm alive. He can't." She dissolved into sobs, her whole body shaking. Rowan stood there, awkward and uncertain. Comforting, terrified, injured pregnant women wasn't covered in the survival skills he'd honed over 3 years of isolation. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. No town. Not yet. You're safe here, Eliza. Nobody knows about this place. Nobody even knows I exist out here. Promise me." She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't tell anyone, please. I can't let him win. I can't let him take everything." Rowan looked down at the desperate woman clutching his arm and felt the last of his carefully constructed walls crumble. "I promise," he said. "You're safe here. I give you my word." The words felt strange in his mouth. 3 years since he'd made a promise to anyone. 3 years since he'd let himself care whether he kept his word. Eliza's grip loosened as exhaustion pulled her under again. Within seconds, she was asleep, her breathing deep and regular despite the injuries. Rowan gently freed his wrist and returned to his chair by the fire. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, in the warmth of the cabin he'd built to be his tomb, Rowan Hale sat and wondered what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Quote, "The storm lasted 3 days. Rowan had seen worse, but not often. Snow piled against the cabin walls until it reached halfway up
This
the single
story was
window.
posted on the
The
channel
wind
west
howled
of
like a living
Betrayal.
thing,
Please
finding
do not
every gap
repost
in the
it
timber
in any
and
form.
whistling through with voices that sounded almost human. But inside, in the small space illuminated by firelight, something unexpected was happening. Life was returning to a place built for death. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness for the first day, fever raging through her body as infection tried to claim what blood loss hadn't. Rowan fought it with everything he had, changing her bandages, forcing broth and water down her throat, monitoring every wound for signs of corruption. On the second day, the fever broke. On the third, Eliza woke fully, her eyes clear and aware for the first time. "You're still here," she said, her voice raspy but strong. Rowan looked up from the pot of stew he was tending. "Where else would I be?" "I don't know. I thought maybe you'd decide I was too much trouble." "Well, you are too much trouble," Rowan said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. "But I've never been good at walking away from trouble. I think there's a story there." "There is. Not one I'm inclined to tell." Eliza accepted this with a small nod. "Fair enough. I've got stories I don't want to tell either." They lapsed into silence, but it was comfortable rather than awkward. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to ease, the wind dropping from a shriek to a moan. "Tell me about him," Rowan said eventually. "Your brother-in-law, Thomas." Eliza's hand moved protectively to her belly. "Why?" "Because if he thinks you're dead, he might come looking for a body once the weather clears. I need to know what we're dealing with." "We? You're under my roof. That makes your problems my problems, at least until you're well enough to leave." Eliza studied him for a long moment, those dark eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her because she began to talk. "My husband was Samuel Vance. We had a ranch in the valley about 30 miles south of here. Good land, water rights, timber. His father built it, and when he died, it went to Samuel. Thomas, that's Samuel's younger brother, he always thought it should have been split between them. But it wasn't. No, their father knew Thomas, knew he'd gamble it away or sell it for quick money. So Samuel got everything, and Thomas got an allowance. Not a small one either, enough to live well if he'd been smart about it. But he wasn't smart about it. He ran through 10 years of allowance in 3 years. Came to Samuel begging for money. Samuel said no. They fought. Thomas left, said he'd make his own fortune." Eliza shifted in the bed, wincing. Rowan moved to help her adjust the pillows, and she gave him a grateful look before continuing. 2 years ago, Samuel died. Logging accident. A widowmaker, that's what they call dead branches that fall without warning, caught him across the head. He was gone before anyone could get him to a doctor. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Eliza's voice was flat, emotion carefully locked away. Thomas came back for the funeral, acted the grieving brother. Then a week later he showed up with a lawyer and some papers he claimed proved Samuel wanted the ranch split if he died. Forgeries? I don't know, maybe. The lawyer seemed legitimate enough, but the whole thing felt wrong. I refused to sign. The land was mine, legally. Samuel had made a will, left everything to me and any children we might have. Her hand pressed against her stomach again, and Rowan understood. "You were pregnant when Samuel died." 3 months along. Thomas didn't know at first. When I told him, he seemed happy. Said Samuel would have wanted the baby to grow up knowing both sides of the family. I thought maybe we could make peace. But that's not what happened. "No." Eliza's voice hardened. 2 months ago, I started noticing things. Fence lines cut, cattle going missing, equipment broken. At first I thought it was just bad luck, but then I started finding evidence. Boot prints that matched Thomas's, a distinctive knife he always carried left behind after one of the incidents. He was trying to force you out. Or force me to sell to him for pennies on the dollar because I couldn't manage on my own. But I'm stubborn. I hired hands, fixed what he broke, rebuilt what he destroyed, made it clear I wasn't going anywhere. So he escalated. Last week he came to the house, said he was done asking nicely, said the land should be his, and he wasn't going to let some woman and her bastard child, her voice caught. He wasn't going to let us keep what was rightfully his. And when you still refused? He had men with him. They grabbed me, dragged me out to the truck. I fought. Scratched one of them across the face, good and deep. Thomas hit me, said I'd made my choice. The clinical tone of her voice was worse than if she'd been crying. Rowan recognized it. The emotional distance people put between themselves and trauma too fresh to process. They drove me up into the mountains, Eliza continued. I don't know exactly where. It was dark. When they stopped, Thomas dragged me out and... She paused, swallowing hard. He had a knife. Said it had to look like an accident. Said if they found my body eventually, it would just be another pregnant woman who wandered off and got lost. But he couldn't make it look like an accident, could he? So he tried to make sure there wouldn't be a body to find. He stabbed me. I counted 6 times, but I might have lost track. I was already falling by then, backwards over the edge. The last thing I remember him saying was, "Nobody will miss you." Rowan's hands had curled into fists without his realizing it. He forced them to relax. He was wrong, Rowan said quietly, about nobody missing you. That baby you're carrying, that baby would have missed you. And for what it's worth, I would have missed knowing you exist in this world. Eliza's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Thank you for saying that, for all of this. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods, literally or figuratively. What do we do? When the storm clears, I mean. Rowan stood and moved to the window, looking out at the endless white. The question he'd been asking himself for 3 days. That depends, he said, on what you want. I can get you to town, to a doctor, to the law. You can tell your story, press charges. Let the system handle it. But your brother-in-law sounds like he's got resources, money, men, lawyers. And right now it's your word against his. You have no witnesses, no proof. Meanwhile, you're vulnerable, injured, pregnant, alone. So what's the other option? Rowan turned from the window to face her. You stay here. Heal. Have the baby. Wait until you're strong enough to fight back on your own terms. Here? In this cabin? For months? It's not much, but it's safe. And I've survived 3 winters here alone. 2 people can manage. You do that? Let a stranger stay in your home for months? Rowan considered the question, considered the woman in his bed who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd fought her way back from the edge of death for the sake of the life growing inside her. You're not a stranger anymore, he said finally. And I think maybe I've been alone long enough. The truth of those words surprised him. Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her hand absently rubbing her swollen belly. Then she nodded. Okay, I'll stay. At least until the baby comes. But I need you to understand something, Rowan. Thomas won't stop looking. He can't afford to, not if there's even a chance I'm alive. When the snow melts, he'll send men into these mountains. And when they come, things are going to get dangerous. Danger doesn't scare me. It should. You don't know Thomas. He's not just greedy. He's vicious. Mean in a way that goes bone deep. The kind of man who'd shoot a lame horse just to watch it die. I've known men like that. Hell, I used to hunt men like that. The words were out before Rowan could stop them. Eliza's eyes sharpened. Hunt them? What does that mean? Rowan turned back to the window, cursing himself. Nothing. Forget I said anything. You can't drop something like that and then say forget it. I can, and I am. Rowan. Eliza. He faced her, and something in his expression made her words die unspoken. We've all got pasts we're running from. You've told me yours because you needed me to understand the danger. I respect that. But my past? That stays buried. It's got nothing to do with right now, with keeping you safe. For a moment he thought she'd push, but Eliza just nodded slowly. Okay, your secrets are yours. But Rowan, when the time comes, when Thomas's men show up, and they will, I need to know you can handle it. I need to know you're not going to freeze up or run away. Can you give me that? Rowan met her eyes and in that moment made a decision that would change everything. When they come, he said quietly, I won't run. I give you my word. Good, because I'm done running too. Outside, the storm finally broke. Pale sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, illuminating a world transformed by snow and ice, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Inside the cabin, Rowan Hale and Eliza Vance sat in silence, Two broken people bound together by circumstance and survival, neither of them knowing that the real storm was still ahead. But they'd face it
This story
together.
was
And
posted
that,
on the channel
Rowan thought
west
as he
of the
watched the
trail.
fire dance in the
Please
hearth.
do not
It was
repost
something
it
he
in any
hadn't
form.
had in a very long time. Something worth fighting for. Something worth protecting. Something against all odds. Like hope. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Rowan would wake before dawn, as he always had, to the sound of wind in the pines and the settling of logs in the hearth. But now there was something else. The soft breathing of another person. The reminder that solitude was no longer his only companion. He'd stoke the fire, careful to keep quiet, then step outside into the frozen pre-dawn to check the trap lines and gather wood. By the time he returned, Eliza would be awake, propped against the pillows he'd arranged to support her broken leg. The first few mornings, she'd tried to hide the pain etched across her face. By the end of the first week, she'd stopped pretending. "How's the leg?" Rowan asked one morning, setting an armload of firewood beside the hearth. "Feels like someone's driving railroad spikes through it every time I breathe," Eliza said. "So, about the same as yesterday. That's what happens when you fall 60 feet into a boulder field." "You're lucky it's only one broken leg." "Oh, is that what I am? Lucky?" Despite the sarcasm, there was no real bite in her words. If anything, Rowan detected the faintest hint of humor, the first he'd heard from her. "Luckier than you should be," he said, hanging his coat on the peg by the door. "How's the baby this morning?" Eliza's hand moved to her stomach in the gesture that had become automatic. "Active. I think he knows we're in trouble." "He? Or she? I don't know. Samuel wanted a boy. I never cared either way as long as—" She trailed off, the momentary lightness fading. "As long as they're healthy," Rowan finished. "The baby will be fine, Eliza. You both will." "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted, measuring coffee grounds into the battered pot. "But I can do everything in my power to make it true. That enough for you?" Eliza watched him work, the economical movements of someone who'd lived alone too long, who'd learned to be efficient because there was no one else to pick up the slack. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. Rowan didn't turn around. "Doing what?" "All of it. You could have walked away from that ravine. Should have, probably. You didn't owe me anything. Don't owe me anything now. But here you are, playing nurse and cook and bodyguard to a woman you didn't know existed a month ago. Why?" The coffee began to percolate, filling the cabin with its bitter aroma. Rowan poured 2 cups before answering. "Maybe I needed someone to save," he said quietly, handing her a cup. "Maybe I was tired of only saving myself." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Their eyes met across the small space, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. They were both running from ghosts, both carrying wounds that went deeper than flesh. "Fair enough," Eliza said, accepting the coffee. "But Rowan, when this is over, when I'm healed, and the baby's born, and it's time for me to face Thomas, you don't have to stay. I won't hold you to anything." "When that time comes," Rowan said, "we'll see." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a commitment, but it was more than Eliza had expected, and she nodded, sipping her coffee in silence, while outside the mountain slowly emerged from night into the gray light of another winter day. The days developed their own pattern. Rowan would hunt, trap, gather firewood, and melt snow for water. Eliza, confined to the bed, would watch him work with increasing frustration. "I should be helping," she said one afternoon as Rowan skinned a rabbit he'd caught. "You are helping. You're healing. That's your job right now." "That's not a job. That's just lying here being useless." "Nothing useless about keeping that baby alive." "I'm going to go crazy if I have to stare at these walls for another 3 months." Rowan glanced up from his work. "Then stop staring at the walls. Tell me something. About your life before. About Samuel." Eliza's expression softened. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." So she talked. Haltingly at first, then with growing ease. She told him about meeting Samuel at a church social when she was 19, about his quiet strength and the way he'd courted her with wildflowers picked from the high meadows, about their wedding in the small chapel in town, about building a life together on land that had been in his family for 3 generations. He wanted children, she said, her voice distant with memory. So many children. Said he wanted the house to be full of noise and chaos. Said he'd grown up too quiet, just him and Thomas and their father who barely spoke except to give orders. Sounds like he was a good man. He was. Not perfect. He had a temper when pushed, and he could be stubborn as a mule about some things, but good, solid. The kind of man you could build a life with and know it would still be standing 50 years later. And then the Widowmaker took him. And then the Widowmaker took him, Eliza echoed. 1 minute he was there planning what crops we'd plant in the spring, talking about building a bigger house for all those children he wanted. The next, she swallowed hard. The next, he was gone. Just gone. Like he'd never been there at all. Rowan set aside the rabbit and wiped his hands on a rag. I'm sorry, for what it's worth. It's worth something, Eliza said, more than you probably know. They fell silent, but it was the comfortable silence of people learning to exist in the same space without needing to fill every moment with words. As the days passed, Eliza's wounds began to heal. The stitches held, the fever stayed away. Her color improved from the deathly pallor of those first days to something closer to healthy. Even the broken leg, immobilized in Rowan's splints and wrapped in strips of cloth, seemed to be mending. But the baby was another matter. Something's wrong, Eliza said one morning, her hand pressed flat against her stomach. Rowan looked up from the deer hide he was scraping. What kind of wrong? I don't know. The baby hasn't moved much today. Usually by now I've felt at least a dozen kicks, but today, almost nothing. Fear flickered across her face, raw and immediate. Rowan set aside his work and moved to the bedside. May I? Eliza nodded, pulling up her shirt to expose the swell of her abdomen. Rowan placed both hands on her belly, feeling for movement, for the telltale flutter of life. Nothing. He pressed gently, repositioning his hands, searching for any sign. Still nothing. Rowan? Eliza's voice was tight with panic. Rowan, what's... Then he felt it. A weak kick, barely perceptible, followed by another. There, he said, relief flooding through him. The baby's moving, sluggish, maybe, but alive. Why is it sluggish? That's not normal, is it? I don't know. I'm not a doctor, Eliza, but if I had to guess, I'd say the baby's stressed. You've been through trauma, physical, emotional. Your body's still healing. It makes sense the baby would be affected. What do we do? Rowan considered. What he knew about pregnancy could fit in a thimble with room to spare, but he knew about survival, about the body's limits, and how to push just to the edge without going over. Rest, he said. More than you have been. And food. You need to eat more. Keep your strength up. The baby's taking what it needs from you, which means you need to take in enough for both of you. I'm eating as much as I can. Then we'll find a way to get you more. There's a trading post 2 days' hike from here. I can go, trade some pelts for supplies. Dried fruit, honey, maybe some cured meat. Things with more substance than rabbit stew. 2 days? You'd leave me here alone for 4 days? The fear in her voice was immediate and visceral. I don't want to, Rowan admitted. But if the baby needs... No! Eliza's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. No, don't go. Please. I can't. If Thomas's men come while you're gone... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Rowan covered her hand with his own. Okay, no trading post. We'll make do with what we have. But Eliza, you have to eat more. I don't care if you're not hungry. That baby needs fuel, and you're the only source it's got. I'll try. Don't try. Do it. Doctor's orders. You just said you're not a doctor. I'm the closest thing you've got, which means my word is law. Now eat. Despite everything, Eliza smiled. You're bossy when you're worried. And you're argumentative when you're scared. We all cope somehow. But that night, lying in his bedroll by the fire while Eliza slept fitfully in the bed, Rowan stared at the ceiling and wondered if he was doing the right thing. Keeping her here, isolated, without proper medical care, was he helping or just delaying the inevitable? The baby needed more than he could provide. Eliza needed more. And if something went wrong during the birth, don't think about it, he told himself. 1 day at a time. Keep them alive 1 day at a time. But the worry gnawed at him, relentless as the cold that seeped through the cabin walls. 2 weeks later, on a morning when the sky
This story
was
was
so clear it hurt
posted
to
on the
look at,
channel west of
Rowan
Betrayal.
spotted the tracks.
Please do not
He'd been
repost it
checking the
in any
northern
form.
trap line, the one that ran along the ridge above the cabin, when he saw them. Boot prints in the snow, recent enough that the edges were still sharp. 2 sets, moving parallel about 20 yards apart in a search pattern. Rowan's blood went cold. He followed the tracks carefully, staying in the tree line where his own prints would be harder to spot. The trail led east toward the higher peaks, then circled back. Whoever had made them had been looking for something. Or someone. "Looking for you," Rowan muttered, studying the prints. Professional searchers, moving systematically, covering ground efficiently. Not hunters, not trappers. Thomas's men. Rowan hurried back to the cabin, his mind racing. The tracks were at least a day old, maybe 2, which meant the searchers had already passed this area and moved on. For now, the cabin was safe. But they'd be back. Men like that always came back. He burst through the cabin door with more force than necessary, startling Eliza from the mending she'd been doing. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, reading his face. "They're here. Searchers. I found tracks on the northern ridge." All color drained from Eliza's face. "How close?" "Close enough. Half a mile, maybe less. But the tracks were old. They've moved on for now." "For now?" Eliza set aside the shirt she'd been mending with shaking hands. "They'll come back." "Probably. Which means we need to be ready." "Ready how? Rowan, I can barely walk. If they find us, they won't find us. Not if we're smart." Rowan was already moving, pulling supplies from their storage places, his movements quick and efficient. "We need to make the cabin look abandoned. No smoke during the day. We keep the windows covered. I'll move the obvious supplies to the cache I built in the rocks about a quarter-mile north. If anyone does come close enough to check inside, they'll see an empty cabin that hasn't been used all winter." "And us?" "We stay quiet. Stay hidden. The cabin's small enough that from the outside it looks like a hunting shack. As long as there's no smoke, no obvious signs of habitation, most searchers won't bother with a thorough investigation." Eliza nodded slowly, processing. Okay, that could work. But Rowan, what if they do investigate? What if they come inside?" Rowan's hand moved to the rifle mounted above the door, a Winchester he'd barely touched in 3 years. "Then we deal with it." "Deal with it how?" "However we have to." The look in his eyes when he said it made Eliza shiver. This was a different Rowan than the one who'd carried her through a blizzard, who'd patiently taught her how to clean fish and laughed at her terrible jokes. This was the man he'd been before the mountains, hard, capable, dangerous. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Really?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "Someone who keeps his promises. That's all you need to know." For the rest of that day, they worked to transform the lived-in cabin into a convincing shell. Rowan moved their supplies to his hidden cache, leaving only the bare minimum. He scattered old leaves across the floor to make it look unused, covered the window from the inside with an old piece of canvas that would block any glimpse of the interior. Eliza, still unable to walk without help, supervised from the bed that Rowan positioned in the darkest corner of the cabin. "If anyone comes," he told her, "you don't move. Don't breathe loud. Don't make a sound. I'll handle it. And if you can't?" Rowan pulled a knife from his belt. Not the hunting blade he wore openly, but a different one, smaller and wickedly sharp. He pressed it into her hand. "Then you do what you have to do to survive. For yourself and that baby. You understand me?" Eliza's fingers closed around the knife's handle. "I understand." That night, they didn't light the fire. The temperature inside the cabin dropped until their breath clouded in front of their faces. Rowan piled every blanket and fur he owned onto the bed, creating a nest of warmth for Eliza and the baby. "You should be in here too," she said, teeth chattering. "There's room. I need to stay alert. Keep watch. You'll freeze." "I've been colder." But an hour later, when Eliza felt Rowan's weight settle carefully onto the edge of the bed, she didn't say anything, just shifted to make room, sharing the cocoon of warmth they'd created. In the darkness, their breathing synchronized. Despite the danger, despite the cold, despite everything, Eliza felt safer than she had in months. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not giving up on me. For caring whether I live or die. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then so softly she almost missed it. Someone should care. Everyone deserves that much. Sleep came slowly, but it came. And in the morning, the tracks were closer. Rowan found them just after dawn. 3 sets this time, moving in a deliberate grid pattern. They'd passed within 200 yards of the cabin. They're tightening the search, he said when he returned, his face grim. Being more thorough. How long before they find us? Days, maybe less. Eliza struggled to sit up, wincing as her broken leg protested. Then we need to leave, now, before they close the net. You can't travel, not in your condition. I can't stay here and wait to be found either. Rowan, if they catch us in this cabin, we're trapped. At least out there we have a chance. Out there, you'll die. The cold, the terrain, your injuries. Eliza, you're 8 months pregnant with a broken leg. You wouldn't make it a mile. Then what do you suggest? Because sitting here waiting for Thomas's men to kick down that door doesn't sound like much of a plan either. They glared at each other across the small space, frustration and fear making them sharp. Finally, Rowan closed his eyes and took a breath. There might be another way. North of here, maybe 3 days' travel in good conditions, there's an old mining camp, abandoned for 20 years, but the structures are still standing. It's remote, more remote than this place. If we could make it there, we could wait them out, have the baby, figure out our next move. 3 days' travel in good conditions, how long in bad conditions with an invalid and a blizzard? I don't know. A week? Maybe more. That's insane. So is staying here. Eliza looked down at her swollen belly, at the legs still wrapped in splints. Every instinct screamed that moving was suicide, but staying felt like slow death. If we go, she said slowly, and I die out there, you save the baby, whatever it takes. You promise me that. Eliza, promise me, Rowan. If it comes down to me or the baby, you choose the baby. Promise. The anguish in his eyes nearly broke her. I promise, he said hoarsely, but it won't come to that. I'll get you both through this. You can't know that. No, but I can damn well try. They spent the day preparing. Rowan fashioned a travois from pine branches and rope, a makeshift sled he could drag through the snow with Eliza riding on it. He packed supplies in a careful balance between weight and necessity. Extra blankets, dried meat, his rifle and ammunition, medical supplies. Every item chosen with brutal practicality. Eliza watched him work with growing trepidation. This was really happening. They were really going to attempt this impossible journey. When do we leave? She asked as night fell. Tomorrow, before dawn. We move during the cold hours when the snow is firm, rest during the warmest part of the day. It'll be slow, but it's our best chance. Our only chance, you mean? That too. That night, neither of them slept much. Rowan checked and rechecked their supplies while Eliza lay in the darkness, feeling the baby move inside her, stronger now than it had been in days, as if it sensed the coming ordeal and was gathering strength. We can do this, she told herself. We have to do this. Just before dawn, Rowan gently shook her shoulder. Time to go. He helped her into layers of clothing, her own, then his spare shirt, then a heavy coat he'd made from deer hide. On her feet, wool socks and boots stuffed with dried grass for insulation. The broken leg he wrapped in extra padding before carefully lifting her onto the travois. How does it feel? He asked. Like I'm lying on a bundle of sticks, Eliza said. Which I am. Can you manage? Do I have a choice? Not really. Then I can manage. Rowan took one last look at the cabin, his home for 3 years, his sanctuary, and his prison. Then he gripped the travois poles and began to pull. The first hour was agony. The travois caught on every rock and root hidden beneath the snow. Eliza bit her lip bloody, trying not to cry out each time they hit a bump. Rowan's shoulders burned with the effort of hauling her weight up the steep terrain, but they made progress. Slow, grinding, painful progress. By midday, they'd covered what Rowan estimated was 3 miles. They rested in a grove of pines, Rowan building a small, nearly smokeless fire to boil water for tea. How's the leg? He asked, offering her a cup. Still broken, Eliza said through gritted teeth, but I'll live. That's the spirit? Don't
This
patronize
story
me.
was posted
I'm allowed
on the
to be
channel
miserable.
west of Betrayal.
Fair enough.
Please do not
Be as
repost
miserable
it
as
in
you
any
want,
form.
as long as you keep fighting. They pushed on as the sun began its descent. The temperature dropped. The wind picked up. Rowan's breath came in ragged gasps, his muscles screaming protest with every step. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. When full darkness finally forced them to make camp, they'd covered perhaps 5 miles, a quarter of the distance they needed. And that was on day 1, when they were both relatively fresh. Rowan constructed a crude shelter using pine boughs and the extra canvas he'd brought, creating a windbreak that would protect them from the worst of the cold. He got Eliza settled inside, wrapped in every blanket they had, before collapsing beside her. "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered. "For what?" "For being a burden. For making this so hard." Rowan turned his head to look at her, his face barely visible in the darkness. "You're not a burden. You're the reason I'm still alive. 3 years I spent in these mountains not caring whether I saw another sunrise. Then I found you, and suddenly I had a reason to care again. So don't apologize for giving me that." Eliza's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing tight. "We're going to make it, aren't we? Tell me we're going to make it." Rowan wanted to lie, to offer false comfort, but he'd never been good at lying, and he wasn't about to start now. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I promise you this. I'll fight for us with everything I have, and I don't lose fights easily." It wasn't the reassurance she'd asked for, but it was what she needed. Eliza closed her eyes, Rowan's hand still clasped in hers, and tried to believe that fighting would be enough. Outside their shelter, the temperature continued to drop. The wind howled through the trees, and somewhere behind them, drawing closer with each passing hour, Thomas's men continued their search. But for that moment, huddled together in the darkness of the wild, Rowan and Eliza had each other. And sometimes, in a world as brutal as theirs had become, that was enough to keep the hope alive. Dawn came too early and too cold. Rowan woke to find frost coating the inside of their shelter, his muscles locked in knots from the previous day's exertion. Beside him, Eliza slept fitfully, her face pale in the gray morning light. He watched her breathe for a moment, counting the rise and fall of her chest, checking for any sign that the night had taken too much from her. She stirred, eyes opening slowly. "We're still alive." Disappointed? Surprised. She tried to shift position and gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Rowan was beside her instantly. "What's wrong? The baby?" "Contractions. Just Braxton Hicks, I think. Practice ones, but they hurt more than they used to." "How long have you been having them?" "On and off through the night. I didn't want to wake you." Rowan bit back a curse. "Eliza, if your body's getting ready for labor, it's too early. The baby's not due for another month at least. Your body doesn't care about due dates. Not after what we've put it through." He checked her over as best he could with frozen fingers and limited light. No bleeding, which was good. The baby was moving, which was better. But the contractions worried him. Stress could trigger early labor, and they'd been living on stress for days now. "We need to move," he said, already beginning to pack up their meager camp. "If those contractions get worse, I want us closer to shelter than we are now." "How far did we come yesterday?" 5 miles, maybe 6. So we have at least 20 more to go." "At least." Eliza closed her eyes. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Rowan stopped what he was doing and knelt beside her. "Yes, we are. I'm going to get you to that mining camp, deliver that baby, and keep both of you alive. That's the plan, and I don't deviate from my plans." "Even when they're impossible?" "Especially then." Despite everything, Eliza smiled. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Can it be both?" They set out as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, turning the snow-covered landscape into a field of blinding white. Rowan pulled the travois with steady determination, choosing his path carefully to avoid the worst of the terrain. Every hour they stopped for 10 minutes, giving his screaming muscles a chance to recover and checking on Eliza. By midday, they'd covered another 4 miles. Progress, but not enough. At this rate, they'd need 5 or 6 days to reach the mining camp, and Rowan wasn't sure either of them had 5 or 6 days left in them. "We need to move faster," he said during their afternoon rest. I'm not exactly slowing you down on purpose. I know. I'm thinking out loud. He studied the terrain ahead, calculating routes and distances. There's a valley that runs north from here. Flatter ground, easier going, but it's more exposed. If Thomas's men are searching, they'll see us, Eliza finished. But if we stay in the high country, we'll die of exhaustion before we reach safety. That about sums it up. Then we take the valley. Being seen is a risk. Dying up here is a certainty. Rowan nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. The valley it is, but we need to move fast once we're in the open. No long rests, no fires during daylight. We push hard and hope we're far enough ahead of the search. They descended into the valley as the afternoon shadows lengthened. The going was immediately easier, the snow shallower, the ground more level. Rowan increased his pace, pulling the travois at nearly double the speed he'd managed in the high country. But easier terrain came with its own price. The valley was a natural corridor, the kind of place hunters and searchers would naturally gravitate toward. Every time Rowan spotted movement on the ridgelines above, a bird taking flight, a branch falling, his hand moved to his rifle. "You're going to wear yourself out," Eliza said, watching him scan the horizon for the 100th time. "Can't be too careful." "You can if it means you collapse before we reach safety. Rowan, I know you're trying to protect us, but you're one man. You can't watch every direction at once and pull this travois and keep us both alive. Watch me." But that night, when they made camp in a grove of aspens, even Rowan had to admit his limits. His hands shook as he built the fire. His legs threatened to give out when he stood. He'd pushed too hard, too fast, and his body was making him pay for it. Eliza watched him collapse beside the fire with growing concern. "When did you last eat?" "I don't know. This morning?" "Rowan, that was 16 hours ago. You've been pulling me through the snow for 16 hours without food. I'm fine. You're an idiot." She rummaged through their supplies and thrust a piece of dried meat into his hand. "Eat. That's an order." "Since when do you give orders?" "Since my protector decided to starve himself for no good reason. Eat, or I'll force feed you." Despite his exhaustion, Rowan smiled. "You're getting bossy in your old age." "I'm 24. Like I said, old age." They ate in silence, watching the fire dance. The temperature had dropped again with nightfall, and Rowan found himself moving closer to the flames without meaning to. "Tell me about before," Eliza said suddenly. "Before what?" "Before the mountains. Before you became a hermit living in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. You said you used to hunt men like Thomas." "What did that mean?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "It's not a story for tonight." "Then when?" "We might not have many nights left, Rowan, and I think I deserve to know who's risking his life for me." She had a point, and they both knew it. Rowan stared into the fire for a long moment, watching the flames consume the wood, turning solid matter into ash and smoke. "I was a marshal," he said finally. "Federal, not local. Tracked fugitives across state lines, brought them in for trial. Did it for almost 10 years. That's noble work." "It was work. Nothing noble about it." His voice had gone flat, emotionless. "I was good at it. Too good, maybe. Could track a man through any terrain, find him no matter where he hid. Had a reputation for always bringing them back." "So what happened? Why'd you leave?" "I didn't leave. I ran." The words tasted like ash. "There was a case, 3 years ago. Serial killer working his way across the territory. Bodies left in his wake, all women, all young. The pattern was clear to anyone who cared to look, but the local authorities didn't care, said they were just unfortunate accidents. But you knew better. I knew better. Tracked him for 6 months, gathering evidence, building a case. Finally cornered him in a town about 100 miles south of here. Small place, not many people. I thought it would be simple. Arrest him, bring him in, let justice take its course." Rowan's hands had curled into fists without him noticing. Eliza reached out, covering them with her own. "You don't have to tell me if it's too hard." "You asked. Might as well hear the whole ugly truth." He took a breath. "The killer knew I was coming. Had a hostage, a woman, pregnant, about your age. Said he'd kill her if I didn't back off. I tried to negotiate. Tried everything I'd been trained to do, but he wasn't interested in negotiating." "What did he do?" "He killed her, right in front of me. slit her throat while I was still trying to talk him down. Then he smiled at me and said, "Your move, Marshal." Eliza's hand tightened on his. What happened then? I killed him. Not arrested.
This story was posted
Not
on the
subdued.
channel West of
Killed.
Betrayal. Please
Put
do
3
not
rounds in his
repost
chest
it in
before
any
he hit the
form.
ground. Rowan's voice was hollow. It was a clean shoot, justified. But the woman was already dead, and her baby died with her. I'd failed to save them, and nothing else mattered. Rowan, that wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I'd tracked him for 6 months, had half a dozen opportunities to take him down before that moment, but I wanted to do it right, by the book, with enough evidence that no lawyer could get him off. And while I was building my case, he killed 3 more women. The pregnant one was just the last. You couldn't have known. I should have known. The words exploded out of him, 3 years of guilt and rage finally finding voice. It was my job to know, to protect people, and I failed. I failed all of them. Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. When Rowan spoke again, his voice was quieter, defeated. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't chase the bad guys knowing that while I was hunting one, 10 more were out there hurting people. Couldn't sleep without seeing her face, seeing the life drain out of her eyes. So I quit, packed what little I owned, came up into these mountains, and built a cabin where no one could find me. Figured if I couldn't save people, at least I could stop failing them. Is that what you think you've been doing up here? Failing people? What else would you call it? 3 years of hiding while the world kept turning, while people kept dying, while men like Thomas kept hurting the vulnerable. Eliza shifted on the travois, pulling herself more upright despite the pain it caused. You want to know what I'd call it? I'd call it grief. I'd call it being human. You lost people, Rowan. You lost them in the worst way possible. And instead of dealing with that pain, you tried to bury it under isolation and silence. And how's that different from failing? Because you're here now. You found me at the bottom of that ravine, and instead of walking away, instead of protecting yourself, you chose to try again. That's not failure. That's courage. Rowan met her eyes across the fire. I'm terrified I'm going to fail you too. Then we'll fail together. But I don't think we will. I think we're going to make it to that mining camp, and you're going to deliver my baby, and we're both going to survive. You know why? Why? Because you're too stubborn to quit, and I'm too angry to die. Together, that's got to count for something. Despite everything, Rowan found himself smiling. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish. Can it be both? They shared a look of understanding, and something shifted between them in that moment. Not love. It was too soon, too complicated for that. But something deeper than mere companionship. A recognition of shared pain, shared determination, shared refusal to let the darkness win. That night, they slept close together for warmth, and for the first time in 3 years, Rowan's dreams were free of the pregnant woman's dying eyes. The 4th day of travel brought new challenges. The valley had narrowed into a gorge, steep walls rising on either side and limiting their options for alternate routes. They had to push straight through, trusting that speed and luck would keep them ahead of any searchers. Around midday, Rowan spotted smoke. Stop, he said quietly, setting down the travois poles. What is it? Campfire. Maybe a mile ahead, near the mouth of the gorge. Eliza struggled to sit up. Thomas's men? Maybe. Or it could be hunters, trappers. This time of year could be anyone. What do we do? Rowan studied the gorge walls, too steep to climb with Eliza on a travois, no side canyons to slip through. Their only option was forward. We wait until dark, he decided. Move past them under cover of night. It's risky, but less risky than walking straight into their camp in daylight. They spent the afternoon huddled behind a tumble of boulders, watching the smoke rise into the pale sky. As the sun set, Rowan could make out the glow of the fire itself, and the shadows of at least 3 men moving around it. 3 against 1, Eliza whispered. I've faced worse odds. When you were a marshal with backup and the law on your side, now you're an outlaw protecting a fugitive. I'm not an outlaw. No? You're harboring someone who, by law, should probably report to authorities. You're running from legitimate searchers. In their eyes, you're as much a criminal as I am. She was right, and they both knew it. Somewhere along the way, Rowan had crossed a line. He'd chosen Eliza over the law, personal justice over legal procedure. The marshal he'd been 3 years ago would have been appalled. The man he was now didn't care. Full darkness finally fell. Rowan checked his rifle, making sure a round was chambered and the action smooth. Then he began the slow, careful process of pulling the travois forward, moving at a crawl to minimize noise. They were halfway past the camp when disaster struck. The travois caught on a hidden root, jerking to a sudden stop. Eliza bit back a cry of pain, but the damage was done. The sound of the travois scraping over rock echoed through the gorge. Voices from the camp. Movement. The sound of rifles being cocked. "Who's there? Show yourself!" Rowan froze, every muscle tensed. Then he heard the magic words that changed everything. "If you're hurt or lost, we can help. We've got food and fire. No need to skulk around in the dark." Not Thomas's men, just travelers offering aid. Rowan made a split-second decision. "Don't shoot. I've got an injured woman here. We're just trying to get through." He stepped into the firelight, hands raised, the travois trailing behind him. 3 men stood around the fire, middle-aged, weathered, with the look of experienced trappers. "Well, I'll be damned," one of them said, lowering his rifle. "You actually do have an injured woman. What the hell are you two doing out here in the middle of nowhere?" "Long story," Rowan said carefully. "They always are." The man who'd spoken gestured to the fire. "Come on then, get warm. We've got stew if you're hungry." Every instinct screamed at Rowan to refuse, to keep moving, to trust no one. But Eliza needed rest, and the baby needed warmth, and maybe, just maybe, these men were exactly what they appeared to be. Good people offering help. "Much obliged," Rowan said, pulling the travois closer to the fire. The trappers introduced themselves as the Morrison brothers, Frank, Jim, and Thomas. At the mention of the last name, Eliza stiffened, but this Thomas was nothing like her brother-in-law. Just a grizzled man in his 50s with kind eyes and a ready smile. "What happened to her?" Frank asked, looking at Eliza's splinted leg and bandaged wounds. "Fell down a ravine," Rowan said, sticking as close to the truth as possible. "I found her, patched her up. Been trying to get her to safety ever since." "Safety's a long way from here," Jim observed. "You got a destination in mind?" "Old mining camp north of here." The 3 brothers exchanged looks. "That's rough country," Thomas said. "Even rougher with an injured woman and winter coming on hard." "You sure that's wise?" "Wise doesn't enter into it. It's what needs to happen." Frank studied Rowan with the assessing gaze of someone who'd seen a lot of life. "You're running from something, or someone." It wasn't a question. Rowan met his gaze steadily. "Could be. Any of our business?" "No." "Fair enough." Frank ladled stew into 2 bowls and handed them over. "Eat, rest. You both look like hell warmed over. In the morning, you can be on your way, and we'll forget we ever saw you." "Why?" Eliza asked. "Why help us if you know we're running?" Frank smiled. "Because everyone's running from something, miss. Some run from the law, some from their past, some from themselves. Long as you're not running from decency, I figure that's your own business." They ate in grateful silence, the stew hot and nourishing after days of dried meat and melted snow. The Morrison brothers kept up a steady stream of conversation, stories of their trapping season, news from the settlements, harmless small talk that required no real response. But as the night deepened, Frank grew serious. "I should warn you," he said. "We've seen search parties in the area. 3 days back, bunch of armed men asking if we'd seen a pregnant woman. Said she'd wandered off from her family, might be hurt and confused." Rowan's hand moved to his rifle. "What did you tell them?" "Told them we hadn't seen anyone," which was true at the time. Frank paused. They didn't seem like family looking for a lost woman, if you catch my meaning. Had the look of hired guns. "How many?" 5, maybe 6. Well armed, moving in a grid pattern, professional-like. Eliza's face had gone pale. "How far behind us?" "Hard to say. They were working the Western Ridge 3 days ago. Could have moved on, could have circled back. These mountains, a man could be a mile away and you'd never know it." Jim leaned forward. "Look, it's none of our business what you're mixed up in. But those men, they're dangerous." We could see it in their eyes. If they find you. They won't, Rowan said flatly. You seem pretty sure of that. I am. The brothers didn't push.
This
The
story
warning
was
had been
posted
delivered.
on the channel west
Somewhere
of
behind
Betrayal.
them, Thomas
Please do
Vance's
not
hired
repost
killers
it
were
in any
closing
form.
the distance. They rested by the Morrison brothers' fire for 4 hours, long enough for Eliza to sleep properly for the first time in days, long enough for Rowan's muscles to stop screaming. Before dawn, Frank woke them with a hand on Rowan's shoulder. Time to move, he said quietly, before light hits. You want any chance of staying ahead of those searchers? You need to be gone before they can track you. Rowan nodded and began gathering their things. Frank helped him check the travois, reinforcing the weak points with fresh rope. There's a pass about 10 miles north, Frank said, keeping his voice low. Narrow, easy to defend if it comes to that. Get through it, you'll be in the high country again. Harder going, but harder for them to follow too. Thank you for everything. Don't thank us. Just get that woman and her baby to safety. Frank pressed something into Rowan's hand, a small pouch that clinked with the weight of coins. For supplies when you reach civilization, or for bribes if those searchers catch up. I can't. You can and you will. Call it payment for the entertainment. Been a while since we had an interesting story to tell. Frank smiled. Now get out of here before I change my mind and decide to be a good citizen. They left as the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, slipping away from the Morrison brothers' camp like ghosts. Behind them, Frank raised a hand in silent farewell. The 5th day was the hardest yet. Eliza's contractions had returned, stronger and more regular than before. Every hour she'd cry out, her hand gripping Rowan's arm hard enough to leave bruises. It's too early, she kept saying. The baby can't come yet. It's too early. I know. Hold on, Eliza. Just hold on. But holding on was getting harder. The pass Frank had mentioned was steep and treacherous, forcing Rowan to half carry, half drag the travois up slopes that threatened to send them both tumbling backward. His shoulders were raw beneath his coat, his hands bloody from gripping the poles. And then Eliza's fever returned. Rowan felt it when he checked on her during their midday rest, the heat radiating off her skin, the glassy sheen in her eyes. No, he breathed. No, not now. He checked the wounds he'd stitched weeks ago. Some had reopened during the journey, and one showed the telltale red streaks of infection spreading. The leg wound, the deepest one, the one he'd been most worried about from the start. Rowan? Eliza's voice was weak. What's wrong? You've got an infection from the leg. How bad? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. We're still 2 days from the mining camp, she said. I'm not going to make it 2 more days, am I? Don't talk like that. Rowan, look at me. Really look at me. I'm burning up. I can barely stay conscious. And the baby's trying to come a month early. We both know what that means. It means I work faster, push harder. But even as he said it, Rowan knew it was futile. Eliza was dying. Without real medical help, antibiotics, surgery, a hospital, the infection would kill her within days, and the baby would die with her. Rowan stood and surveyed their surroundings with desperate eyes. They were in a box canyon, steep walls on 3 sides, and only one way out. The temperature was dropping as evening approached. Storm clouds were building on the horizon. Every option was bad. Staying here meant death. Pushing on meant death. Going back meant capture and death. Unless there was one other option, 1 chance in 1,000, maybe less. Rowan knelt beside Eliza and took her hand. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Always. There's a cave system in these mountains. My friend told me about it years ago. Natural hot springs, warm year-round. It's not far from here, maybe 3 hours if I push hard. If I can get you there, the warmth might help fight the infection. Give your body a chance to recover. And if you're wrong, then at least you'll die warm instead of frozen. Eliza managed a weak smile. That's dark humor, even for you. I'm a dark kind of man, so what do you say? One last gamble? We've come this far on gambles. Might as well see it through. Her hand tightened on his. But Rowan, if I don't make it, you'll make it. If I don't, you take the baby. Cut it out of me if you have to. Promise me you'll save my child. The thought made Rowan's stomach turn, but he nodded. I promise. Thank you. For everything. For giving me hope when I'd lost it all. Save your thanks for when we're safe. But as Rowan lifted the travois poles and began the desperate race toward the caves, he wondered if safety was just another word for the impossible. The journey to the caves pushed Rowan beyond any limit he'd ever known. His vision tunneled. His legs moved on pure muscle memory. Twice he stumbled and nearly fell, catching himself at the last second. Eliza had stopped responding to his questions an hour ago. Her fever raged unchecked, her skin burning to the touch even through layers of clothing. Just a little farther, Rowan told himself. Just a little more. The sun had set when he finally saw it. A dark opening in the cliff face, steam rising from within like breath from some underground beast. The caves. Rowan pulled the travois into the entrance and nearly wept with relief. The temperature inside was 40 degrees warmer than outside, heat radiating from the hot springs deeper in the cave system. The air was humid, almost tropical compared to the frozen wasteland beyond. He carried Eliza to the edge of the largest spring, a pool of crystalline water that steamed in the dim light filtering from outside. Carefully, gently, he began removing her clothes, down to the thin undershirt she wore beneath her layers. Then he lowered her into the water. Eliza gasped, her eyes flying open. What? Hot springs. The heat should help with the infection. Just relax. Let it work. For long minutes, Rowan sat beside the pool, supporting Eliza's head above water, watching her face for any sign of improvement or decline. The baby moved beneath the surface of her swollen belly, still fighting, still refusing to give up. You're a fighter, kid, Rowan murmured to the unborn child. Just like your mother. Don't quit on me now. Hours passed. The fever began to break. Color returned to Eliza's cheeks. Her breathing deepened, steadied. She was going to live. Rowan's head dropped to his chest, exhaustion and relief hitting him all at once. They'd made it. Against all odds, through impossible terrain and devastating injuries and hunting parties and infection, they'd made it. Rowan? Eliza's voice was stronger now, more alert. I'm here. We're alive. We're alive. She turned her head to look at him, really look at him, and what he saw in her eyes made his breath catch. Gratitude, yes. Relief, absolutely. But something else too. Something deeper, more dangerous. I was wrong about you, she said softly. Wrong how? In the cabin, I asked who you were. You said you were someone who keeps his promises, but you're more than that. You're someone who makes impossible things possible, someone who refuses to quit even when quitting is the only sane option. I'm just stubborn. No, you're extraordinary. Eliza's hand found his, and I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the steamy air between them, impossible and true all at once. Rowan should have pulled away, should have reminded her that love born from crisis rarely survived peacetime, should have protected both of them from hoping for something that could never work. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a declaration. But when Eliza kissed him back, there was nothing tentative about it. This was need and want and the desperate affirmation of life in the face of death. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan pressed his forehead to hers. This is crazy, he whispered. Everything about this is crazy. But it's the best kind of crazy. Your brother-in-law is still hunting you. You're about to have a baby in a cave in the middle of winter. We have no plan, no backup, no guarantee we'll survive the next week. I know, and I don't care. Eliza's hand cupped his face. For 3 years, you've been dead inside, just going through the motions. And for 6 months, I've been fighting alone, terrified and angry and ready to give up. But right now, in this moment, we're both alive. Really, truly alive. That has to count for something. She was right. Rowan knew she was right. For the first time since that pregnant woman died in his arms 3 years ago, he felt something other than guilt and emptiness. He felt hope. When this is over, he said carefully, when Thomas is dealt with and the baby's born and you're safe, ask me again. Ask me if this is crazy, if we have a chance, and I'll give you a real answer. And until then, we survive, together. Eliza smiled, and in that smile Rowan saw their future, uncertain, dangerous, but undeniably theirs. Outside the cave, night deepened over the mountains.
This story
The
was
storm that
posted
had
on the
been
channel
building
west
finally
of
broke.
Betrayal.
Snow
Please do
falling
not
in thick
repost it
curtains
in any
that would
form.
cover their tracks and buy them precious time. Inside, surrounded by warmth and steam and the steady drip of mineral-rich water, two broken people held each other close and dared to believe that broken things could still be made whole. The war wasn't over. Thomas's men were still out there, still hunting. The baby was still coming early, still at risk. The future was still uncertain and terrifying, but for that one perfect moment, none of it mattered. They had each other. They had hope. And sometimes, in a world as harsh as theirs, that was enough to light the way forward through the darkest night. They stayed in the cave for 3 days. 3 days while the infection slowly retreated under the constant warmth of the hot springs and Eliza's body fought its way back from the edge. 3 days while Rowan hunted in the early mornings, bringing back rabbits and grouse that he cooked over a small fire near the cave entrance. 3 days of healing, of whispered conversations in the steam-filled darkness, of learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with survival. On the morning of the 4th day, Eliza woke to find Rowan already dressed, checking his rifle with the methodical precision of a man preparing for war. "What's wrong?" she asked, pushing herself up on her elbows. "We can't stay here any longer. The storm's passed, and that means Thomas's men will be moving again. We've been lucky so far, but luck runs out." "How's my leg?" Rowan moved to her side and carefully unwrapped the splints. The swelling had gone down considerably, and while the bone was far from healed, it was stable. "Good enough to travel if we're careful. The infection's almost gone. You're stronger than you were." "Strong enough to make it to the mining camp?" "We're not going to the mining camp." Eliza stared at him. "What? Why not?" "Because I've been thinking, really thinking, for the first time since I found you in that ravine." Rowan sat down beside her, his expression serious. "We can run to the mining camp, hide out for another few months while you have the baby, and recover. But then what? Thomas isn't going to stop. He'll keep searching, keep hiring men, keep coming after you until one of you is dead. Running just delays the inevitable. So what are you suggesting? We stop running. We turn and face him." "Rowan, that's suicide. He's got money, men, guns, and we've got something he doesn't. We've got the truth, and we've got nothing left to lose." Rowan's hand covered hers. "There's a trading post about 2 days south of here. Big enough to have a telegraph, probably a deputy or two passing through. We go there, we tell your story, we force Thomas's hand, make him come to us on our terms. He'll kill us both. Maybe. Or maybe he'll make a mistake. Men like Thomas, they're used to operating in the shadows, bullying people who can't fight back. But you're not dead like he thinks. You're alive, and you've got a witness now, me. That changes everything." Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her hand absently rubbing her swollen belly. The baby kicked against her palm, strong and insistent. "You really think we can do this?" she asked finally. "I think we can try. And I think trying is better than spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. If we do this, if we confront Thomas, there's no going back. One of us might not survive." "I know. And you're willing to risk that? For me?" Rowan met her eyes, and in them she saw the answer before he spoke. "I've been half dead for 3 years, Eliza. You brought me back to life. Whatever happens
This story
next,
was posted
at
on the
least I'll
channel
have lived
west
again.
of Betrayal.
That's worth any
Please
risk."
do not repost it
She
in
kissed
any
him then,
form.
fierce and desperate, pouring everything she couldn't say into that single gesture. When they broke apart, her decision was made. "Okay, we do it your way. But Rowan, if something happens to me, if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, you take my baby and you run. You give that child the life I couldn't. Promise me." "I promise. But it's not going to come to that." 2 days later, they reached the trading post. It was called Caldwell's Station, a cluster of rough buildings huddled in a valley where 3 trails converged. Trappers, hunters, and the occasional prospector stopped here to trade furs for supplies, to drink away their loneliness, to hear news from the outside world. A telegraph line ran through, connecting the isolated outpost to civilization. Rowan pulled the travois up to the largest building, a combination general store, saloon, and boarding house. A handful of men stood outside, smoking and talking. They fell silent as Rowan approached, their eyes taking in the battered travois and its heavily pregnant passenger. "We need a room," Rowan said to the nearest man. "And a doctor if there's one around." "Ain't no doctor this far out," the man replied, chewing tobacco. "But Maggie inside, she's birthed about every baby within 50 miles. She can take a look at your woman." "Much obliged." Inside, the trading post was warm and smoky, filled with the smell of coffee and unwashed bodies. A woman in her 50s looked up from behind the counter, Maggie, presumably, and her eyes widened at the sight of Eliza. "Sweet mercy, what happened to her?" "Accident up in the high country," Rowan said, the lie coming easily. "Broke her leg, took some bad wounds. I've been keeping her alive, but she needs proper care now." Maggie came around the counter, all business. "Get her upstairs, second room on the right. I'll boil water and get my supplies." Rowan carried Eliza up the narrow stairs to a small room that held a bed, a chair, and little else. He laid her down gently, and she immediately grabbed his hand. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. Too late for second thoughts now. Maggie bustled in moments later, her arms full of clean linens and medical supplies that put Rowan's crude wilderness aid to shame. She shooed him out of the room with a firm hand. "Go on, get out. This is women's work. I'll call you if I need you." Rowan retreated to the hallway, then down to the main room where he nursed a cup of terrible coffee and tried not to think about all the ways this plan could go wrong. After what felt like hours but was probably only one, Maggie emerged from upstairs. "She's in better shape than she should be," the older woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Whoever patched her up knew what they were doing. The leg's healing clean, wounds are closed, baby's strong, might come early, but should be fine if we're careful." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. That girl's been through hell, and she's still scared out of her mind. She won't tell me what happened, but I've seen enough battered women to know trouble when I see it." Maggie fixed Rowan with a sharp look. "You the one who hurt her?" "No, ma'am. I'm the one trying to keep her alive." "Good, because if you were the one who hurt her, I'd gut you myself." She paused. "She needs rest and decent food. I'll make sure she gets both. You need anything else?" "The telegraph. Is it working?" "Last I checked." "Why?" "I need to send a message." Maggie nodded toward a small office in the back corner. "Help yourself." 5 cents a word. Rowan composed the message carefully, each word chosen for maximum impact. Then he paid the operator and watched as the man tapped out the letters across the wire. The message was addressed to Thomas Vance at the ranch Eliza had described. It was simple, direct, and calculated to bring him running. "Your sister-in-law is alive. If you want the land, come claim it. Caldwell Station. Come alone." The operator looked up after sending it. "This going to bring trouble?" "Almost certainly." "You paying for the damages when it does?" Rowan laid a handful of the coins Frank Morrison had given him on the counter. "That enough?" The operator counted it and nodded. "Should cover it. But mister, if you're calling down the kind of trouble I think you are, you might want to be somewhere else when it arrives." "Can't do that, but I appreciate the concern." He returned upstairs to find Eliza asleep, her face peaceful for the first time in weeks. Rowan settled into the chair beside her bed and began the wait. Thomas Vance arrived 3 days later. Rowan was downstairs when the horses came. 6 of them, carrying men with hard eyes and weapons worn easy on their hips. Thomas dismounted first, a tall man in his 30s with Samuel's features twisted into something cruel and calculating. "I'm looking for Rowan Hale," Thomas announced, his voice carrying across the trading post's main room. "That'd be me." Rowan stood from his table, making no move toward the rifle leaning against the wall behind him. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You sent the message about my sister-in-law." "I did." "Where is she?" "Upstairs, resting. She's been through a lot, as you well know." A flicker of something, surprise, uncertainty, crossed Thomas's face before vanishing behind a mask of cold control. "I don't know what lies she's told you, but Eliza's not well. Hasn't been since my brother died. The grief, the pregnancy, it's made her unstable. Dangerous even." "That's an interesting story. Want to hear mine?" "Not particularly. I want my sister-in-law. She belongs home, where family can care for her."
This
The
story
way
was
you cared
posted
for
on
her
the
when you
channel
stabbed her
West
6
of
times and
Betrayal.
threw her off a cliff.
Please do not repost
The
it
room
in
went
any
dead
form.
silent. Thomas's men shifted, hands moving toward weapons. But Thomas himself went very still, his face carefully blank. That's quite an accusation. You have any proof of this fairy tale? I have Eliza, and I have the scars on her body that match the story she told me. And I have my testimony as a witness to what I found. A woman left for dead because someone wanted her land. Your testimony. Thomas smiled, but there was no humor in it. And who are you exactly? What makes you credible? Former federal marshal, 10 years of service. My testimony might not be enough to convict you in court, but it'll be enough to start an investigation. Enough to bring scrutiny you don't want. That hit home. Rowan could see it in the way Thomas's jaw tightened, the way his eyes flicked to his men and back. What do you want? Thomas asked finally. What do you want? You came all this way. You brought armed men. What were you planning to do when you found Eliza alive? Take her home, get her help. Help like you got her before? No, I don't think so. Rowan took a step forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave Eliza alone. You're going to stop claiming rights to her land. You're going to walk away and never look back. And if I don't, then I take her to the nearest territorial courthouse and she tells her story under oath, with me backing her up. Maybe the law believes us, maybe it doesn't. But either way, everyone in the territory will know what you tried to do. Your reputation will be destroyed, your business will suffer, and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when someone's going to come for you the way you went for her. Thomas's hand had moved to the gun at his hip. Or I could just kill you both right here, right now, save myself the trouble. You could try. Rowan's voice was calm, almost conversational. But Maggie's already gone for the deputy. Yes, there is one passing through, and he's been listening to this whole conversation from the back room. And even if you kill me, even if you kill Eliza, the story's already out. I sent telegrams before you arrived. Newspapers in 3 territories know a pregnant woman was attacked and left for dead. They know her name. They know yours. It was a bluff. Rowan hadn't sent any telegrams except the one to bring Thomas here. But Thomas didn't know that, and the uncertainty in his eyes said the bluff was working. You're lying. Am I? You want to risk it? For a long moment, they faced each other across the trading post floor, 2 men locked in a battle of wills with everything hanging in the balance. Then Eliza appeared at the top of the stairs. She was dressed in a simple cotton dress Maggie had given her, her hair brushed and pulled back. The broken leg was wrapped in clean bandages, and she leaned heavily on a crutch Rowan had fashioned from a broken chair. But despite her obvious fragility, there was steel in her spine as she looked down at the brother-in-law who tried to kill her. Hello, Thomas. Thomas stared up at her like he was seeing a ghost. Eliza. My God, we thought you were dead. We've been searching for weeks. Stop. Her voice cut through his words like a blade. Stop lying. We're past that now. She made her way slowly down the stairs, each step clearly painful but accomplished with dignity. When she reached the bottom, she stood beside Rowan, presenting a united front. You tried to kill me, she said simply. You stabbed me 6 times and threw me over a cliff because I wouldn't give you Samuel's land. My land. That's not... I have the scars, Thomas. All 6 of them. I remember every second of it. The look in your eyes, the words you said. Nobody will miss you.
This
Those
story
were
was
your last
posted
words
on the
before I
channel
fell.
West of Betrayal.
Thomas's
Please do not
composure was
repost it
cracking.
in any form.
Eliza, you're confused. The pregnancy, the stress. I'm not confused. I'm angry. Angry that you killed my husband. Yes, I know about that too. The Widowmaker was no accident, was it? You cut that branch so it would fall. You murdered your own brother for land. The accusation hung in the air, and this time Thomas didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it, not with his guilt written across his face for everyone to see. Samuel was weak, he said quietly. Father knew it. That's why he left the ranch to me in spirit, even if the will said otherwise. I was just correcting a mistake. By killing him? By trying to kill me and my baby? The baby's not even Samuel's, is it? You were sleeping around, I know you were. That child's a bastard, and it has no claim to Vance land. Rowan's fist connected with Thomas's jaw before he'd consciously decided to throw the punch. Thomas went down hard, blood spraying from his split lip. His men reached for their guns, but Rowan already had his own weapon drawn, aimed steadily at Thomas's head. "Nobody moves," Rowan said quietly, "or Thomas dies right here." The hired guns froze, caught between their employer and the cold certainty in Rowan's eyes that said he absolutely would pull that trigger. Thomas pushed himself to his knees, wiping blood from his mouth. "You're making a mistake. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A coward who murders family for money. A man so small he tried to kill a pregnant woman rather than admit he wasn't entitled to what he wanted. I have lawyers, judges in my pocket. You think your word means anything against that?" "No, but I think Eliza's does." Rowan holstered his gun and pulled a folded document from his pocket, a deed, signed and witnessed by Maggie and the deputy who now emerged from the back room. "This is a legal transfer of property. Eliza's selling the ranch." Thomas's eyes widened. "You can't." "She can, and she did, to me, for $1 and the promise of protection. It's all legal, all properly filed as of this morning. The ranch is no longer Vance property. That's fraud. No, that's business. And if you want to challenge it in court, you're welcome to try. But like I said, that means investigations. Questions about how Eliza got those scars, about how Samuel really died, about where you've been spending your money, and on whom." Rowan let that last part sink in. He'd been gambling, guessing that a man like Thomas would have other secrets, other vulnerabilities. The fear that flashed across Thomas's face said the gamble had paid off. "What do you want?" Thomas asked again, but this time his voice was hollow, defeated. Eliza stepped forward, leaning on her crutch. "I want you to leave. Sign a document giving up any claim to the ranch, to me, to my child. In exchange, I'll sell the land back to you, at fair market value, paid over 10 years. You'll get what you wanted, just not the way you wanted it." "And if I refuse?" "Then we go to court. We tell everyone what you did. And even if we lose, even if your lawyers get you off, everyone will know. Your name will be poison. Is that what you want?" Thomas looked between them, seeing his options narrow to a single point. He could fight and maybe win in court, but lose everything that mattered. Or he could accept this compromise and salvage something from the wreckage. "The whole ranch?" he asked. "Fair market value?" "Every acre, but paid over time, with interest. And you never come near me or my family again." For a long moment, Thomas was silent. Then he nodded once, sharp and bitter. "Fine. Draw up the papers." The deputy produced a contract he'd prepared in advance. Rowan had been thorough in his planning. Thomas read it through, his face darkening with each paragraph, but he signed at the bottom. Eliza signed next, her hand steady despite the pain she had to be in. "It's done," the deputy said, folding the documents. "These will be filed in the territorial office. The agreement is binding." Thomas stood, his men gathering around him like nervous shadows. He looked at Eliza, and for just a moment something like regret crossed his features. "I loved my brother," he said quietly. "In my own way." "Not enough to let him live," Eliza replied. Thomas flinched. Then he turned and walked out of the trading post, his men following. Within minutes, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. The silence they left behind was deafening. Rowan caught Eliza as her legs gave out, her strength finally exhausted. He carried her back upstairs and laid her on the bed, where she immediately curled into a ball and began to sob, not from pain, but from the release of months of terror and rage. "It's over," Rowan murmured, holding her. "It's really over." "He killed Samuel," Eliza choked out between sobs. "I always wondered, but I didn't want to believe it. My husband, and he just killed him like it was nothing." "I know. I'm sorry." "What if he comes back? What if he breaks the agreement?" "He won't. Men like Thomas, they're bullies. They only fight when they think they can win. We took away his certainty, and that's all the weapon we needed." Eliza cried until she had no tears left, then lay exhausted in Rowan's arms. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson. "What happens now?" she asked eventually. "Now you rest. Have the baby. Heal completely. And then?" "And then we figure out what comes next, together." "The ranch. You own it now. You could keep it, sell it yourself." Rowan shook his head. I bought it for you, not me. Once Thomas pays the full amount, it's yours again, to do with as you please. What if I please to share it with you? He looked down at her, seeing the question in her eyes, the same question she'd asked in the cave, only more certain now, tested by fire and found true. Ask me again in a year, he said softly, when the baby's born and thriving, when you've had time to grieve Samuel properly, when you're sure this isn't just gratitude or trauma bonding. And if I'm still sure then I'll give you a proper answer. Eliza smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I'll hold you to that, Rowan Hale. I'm counting on it. That night, while Eliza slept the sleep of the truly exhausted, Rowan sat by the window and watched the stars emerge one by one. 3 years ago, he'd come to these mountains to die. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. He'd buried himself in isolation, convinced that was all he deserved. Then Eliza had fallen into his life, literally, and everything had changed. He thought about the pregnant woman who died in his arms 3 years ago, about how her death had broken something in him that he thought could never be repaired. But maybe it hadn't been broken. Maybe it had just been waiting for the right reason to heal. Downstairs, someone was playing a fiddle, the music drifting up through the floorboards. It was a sad song, full of longing and loss, but beautiful in its melancholy. Rowan closed his eyes and let himself feel it all, the pain, the hope, the fear, the love. Let himself be human again, messy and complicated and gloriously alive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The baby would come soon, and with it all the uncertainties of new life. Thomas might change his mind, might come back looking for revenge. The ranch would need work. Decisions would need to be made. The future would have to be built from the ground up. But tonight, in this small room above a trading post at the edge of the world, Rowan Hale allowed himself something he hadn't permitted in 3 long years. He allowed himself to hope. And in the bed behind him, Eliza stirred in her sleep and smiled, her hand resting on the swell of her belly where their future grew stronger with each passing day. The war was over. The enemy had been faced and defeated, not with bullets, but with truth and courage and the refusal to let fear win. Now came the harder part. Now came building a life worth living. But for 2 people who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd found each other in the darkness and refused to let go, even that impossible task seemed somehow within reach. The baby came 2 weeks later, on a morning when frost still clung to the windows, and the first hint of spring fought to break through winter's grip. Eliza had been restless all night, pacing the small room despite her healing leg, her hand pressed to her lower back. Rowan had stayed awake with her, making tea she didn't drink, and offering comfort she couldn't accept through the waves of discomfort. Something's different, she said just before dawn. This isn't practice, this is real. Maggie confirmed it within minutes of being summoned. Baby's coming today, could be hours, could be longer. First babies like to take their time. But this baby, like its mother, was a fighter who refused to follow anyone's schedule. The labor was brutal and swift. Eliza screamed herself hoarse while Maggie barked orders and Rowan held her hand hard enough that his fingers went numb. The small room became a universe of pain and effort and the desperate animal need to bring new life into the world. I can't, Eliza gasped during a brief respite. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can, Rowan said, wiping sweat from her forehead. You've survived everything else. You can survive this. What if something's wrong? What if the baby... Nothing's wrong. The baby's strong.
This story
just
was
like
posted
you.
on the channel west of
Another
the trail.
contraction hit.
Please do
and
not
Eliza's
repost
scream
it
cut
in any
off all
form.
conversation. Maggie worked between her legs, murmuring encouragement and instructions that blurred together into white noise. Then, just when it seemed like it would never end, Maggie's voice cut through the haze. One more push, girl. Just one more. I can see the head. Eliza bore down with everything she had left, a sound torn from the depths of her being, and suddenly the room was filled with a new cry. A baby's cry. It's a girl, Maggie announced, holding up a tiny, furious creature covered in blood and vernix. And she's got a set of lungs on her, that's for certain. Eliza collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Maggie cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a soft blanket. Then the older woman placed the squirming bundle in Eliza's arms. "Hello, little one," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. Hello, my beautiful girl. The baby quieted at her mother's voice, dark eyes blinking open to stare up at the face hovering above her. She was perfect, impossibly tiny, with a shock of dark hair and features that were pure Samuel Vance. Eliza's breath caught. She looks like him, she said softly. Like Samuel. Rowan, who'd been standing to the side giving mother and daughter their moment, moved closer. The baby's hand escaped the blanket, fingers spreading and closing reflexively. Without thinking, Rowan extended his own hand, and those tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. Well, she's got a grip, he said, his voice rough with emotion he didn't bother to hide. She's a survivor, Eliza said, like her mother, like her father. She looked up at Rowan, and in her eyes was a question. Would you like to hold her? Rowan had held many things in his life, guns, badges, the hands of dying people. But as Maggie showed him how to support the baby's head and Eliza carefully transferred the warm weight into his arms, he realized he'd never held anything that mattered quite this much. The baby stared up at him with those unfocused newborn eyes, and Rowan felt something shift in his chest. This was Samuel's daughter, yes. But she was also the child he'd carried across mountains, the life he'd fought to protect before he'd even known her name. Hello, little fighter, he murmured. Welcome to the world. She needs a name, Eliza said, watching them with a soft smile. What were you thinking? Eliza was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on the blanket that covered her daughter. Sarah, after Samuel's mother, and Hope for a middle name, because that's what she is, our hope for something better. Sarah Hope Vance, Rowan said, testing the name. The baby yawned, seemingly satisfied. I think she approves. Maggie bustled around the room, cleaning up and checking on Eliza with practiced efficiency. You did good, girl, real good. Baby's healthy, you're healthy. Now you both need rest. But rest was hard to come by with a newborn who seemed determined to experience every moment of her new existence at full volume. Sarah cried to be fed, cried to be changed, cried simply because she could. Eliza, exhausted but radiant, attended to her daughter with the fierce devotion of a woman who'd nearly lost everything. Rowan found himself relegated to support duties, heating water, fetching supplies, taking the baby when Eliza needed sleep. He'd never been around infants before, and the learning curve was steep and occasionally terrifying. Am I doing this right? He asked Maggie one evening as he attempted to change Sarah's diaper for the third time. You're doing fine. Babies are tougher than they look. She's so small. What if I hurt her? Maggie laughed. That tiny thing survived her mother falling off a cliff and a month-long trek through winter mountains. I think she can handle you being a bit clumsy with a diaper. As the days passed and spring began to assert itself more strongly, a routine developed. Eliza would feed and care for Sarah while Rowan handled everything else, trading furs for supplies, arranging for their eventual departure, and keeping watch for any sign of Thomas Vance breaking their agreement. But Thomas, it seemed, had accepted defeat. The first payment arrived via bank draft exactly when promised, along with a terse note acknowledging receipt of the deed. No threats, no demands, just the cold transaction of business. He's really gone, Eliza said when Rowan showed her the payment. It's really over. It's really over, Rowan confirmed. She looked down at Sarah, sleeping peacefully in her arms. So what do we do now? The ranch is too big for me to manage alone, especially with a baby, and I can't go back there, Rowan. Too many memories. Samuel dying, Thomas's betrayal. I can't raise Sarah in that shadow. Then we don't go back. We sell it properly this time to someone who'll care for it. Use the money to start fresh somewhere else. Where? Rowan moved to the window, looking out at the valley that was slowly transforming from white to green. There's land farther north, up near where the mining camp was. Good timber, water, hunting, remote enough that trouble won't find us easy, but not so isolated we can't reach help if Sarah needs it. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about a lot of things. He turned to face her. You asked me a question back in the cave. You said you thought you were falling in love with me. Do you remember? Eliza's breath caught. I remember. You asked me to give you a real answer when this was over, when Sarah was born and safe, when the danger had passed. Well, it's over, and I have my answer. He crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, taking her free hand in his while being careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. I came to these mountains to die, Eliza. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I was done with people, done with caring, done with everything. Then I found you at the bottom of that ravine, and you brought me back to life. You and Sarah both. You gave me a reason to fight again, to hope again, to believe that broken things could be mended. Rowan, let me finish. I know this is complicated. I know Sarah's not my blood, and I know her father was a good man you loved. I'm not trying to replace him or pretend otherwise. But if you'll have me, I want to be part of your lives. I want to build something with you, raise Sarah together, make a home in the wild where we can all heal. Tears were streaming down Eliza's face. You're asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to build a future with me. Marriage, partnership, whatever form that takes. I'm asking you to choose this. Choose us. Choose the possibility that two broken people can make something whole together. You're not broken anymore, Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. Maybe you were once, but not now. Now you're the strongest man I've ever known. And yes, Rowan Hale, yes to all of it. Yes to building a future. Yes to marriage. Yes to raising Sarah together. Yes to everything. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, while Sarah slept between them like a promise made flesh. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who passed through Caldwell Station once a month. Maggie stood as witness, along with the deputy and a handful of trappers who'd befriended them during their stay. Eliza wore a simple blue dress Maggie had helped her sew, and Rowan wore his cleanest shirt. Sarah, barely a month old, slept through the entire proceeding. Do you, Rowan Hale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward? I do. And do you, Eliza Vance, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was brief but tender, interrupted by Sarah waking with a wail of protest at being excluded from the celebration. The small gathering laughed, and Maggie pressed a handful of wildflowers into Eliza's free hand. Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. You've earned this happiness. Thank you for everything. That night, in the small room they'd called home for nearly 2 months, Rowan held his new family close and marveled at the impossible path that had led them here. What are you thinking? Eliza asked, her head resting on his shoulder while Sarah nursed. That I never thought I'd have this. A wife, a daughter, even if she's not mine by blood, a reason to wake up every morning. She's yours in every way that matters, Eliza said firmly. Blood doesn't make a father, love does. And you've loved her from the moment you felt her kick in my belly back in that ravine. She's made it pretty easy to love her. As if in response, Sarah's tiny hand reached up and grabbed Rowan's finger, holding on with that fierce grip that never failed to move him. See? Eliza smiled. She knows who her father is. They left Caldwell Station at the end of May, when the last of the snow had melted and the trails were passable again. The travois that had once carried a broken, dying woman now carried supplies in a carefully cushioned basket where Sarah could ride in relative comfort. The journey north took 2 weeks, but it was nothing like the desperate flight of months before. This time they traveled slowly, stopping often to rest and let Sarah feed.
This story was
The weather
posted
held
on the
fair,
channel west
and the
of
landscape
Betrayal.
transformed around
Please do
them
not
into something
repost it
green
in any
and
form.
alive. When they finally reached the valley Rowan had described, Eliza understood immediately why he'd chosen it. A river ran through the center, clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. Timber stood tall and thick, perfect for building. Game trails crisscrossed the meadows, and the mountains rose on all sides like protective walls, keeping the world at bay. It's beautiful, Eliza breathed. It's home, Rowan said, if you want it to be. They built their cabin over the course of that first summer. Rowan did the heavy work while Eliza cared for Sarah and helped where she could, her leg finally strong enough to bear weight again. It was a simple structure, larger than Rowan's first cabin, but still modest by any standard. One main room with a hearth, a sleeping loft for Sarah, and a small porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set. We should have a garden, Eliza said one evening as they rested after a long day of work. Vegetables, maybe some herbs. Sarah should grow up knowing where food comes from. We could expand the cabin too, add another room when she's older, maybe more rooms if... Rowan stopped, suddenly uncertain. If we have more children? Eliza finished. She was quiet for a moment, then took his hand. I'd like that. Someday. Not right away, but someday. Sarah should have brothers and sisters. You're sure? After everything with the pregnancy, the birth? I'm sure. What happened with Sarah, that was because of stress and trauma. But here, in this place, with you, I think it could be different. I think we could have a real family. And they did. Their second child, a son they named Samuel after Eliza's first husband, was born 18 months later in the cabin Rowan had built. The birth was easier this time, and the baby came into the world healthy and squalling. Sarah, toddling now and fiercely independent, immediately appointed herself her brother's protector. Gentle, Eliza cautioned as Sarah petted the baby's head with all the delicacy of a bear cub. He's little. I know, Mama. I take care of him. And she did, with a devotion that made both parents smile. 2 years after Samuel came Emma, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. Then, 3 years later, twin boys, Daniel and James, who seemed to arrive in this world already arguing about everything. The cabin expanded with each child, rooms added on like growth rings on a tree. The garden Eliza had envisioned became a reality, providing vegetables that supplemented the game Rowan hunted. They acquired chickens, then a milk cow, then a pair of horses that made the monthly trip to Caldwell Station for supplies easier. Life fell into a rhythm dictated by seasons and children's needs. Winters were long and sometimes harsh, but the cabin was warm and the family close. Spring meant planting and new life. Summer was for growing and exploration, the older children helping with chores while the younger ones played in the meadow under watchful eyes. Fall brought harvest and preparation for the cold months ahead. Through it all, Rowan and Eliza built something neither had thought possible, a life defined not by what they'd lost, but by what they'd found. One evening, nearly 5 years after they'd settled in the valley, Rowan and Eliza sat on the porch while the children slept inside. Sarah was 7 now, Samuel almost 6, Emma 3, and the twins barely a year old. The cabin was silent for the first time all day, and the peace was almost shocking. Do you ever regret it? Eliza asked, her head resting on Rowan's shoulder. Regret what? This life. The isolation, the hard work, raising someone else's children. You could have gone back to civilization, back to being a marshal, made something of yourself. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he turned to look at her properly. I made something of myself. I made a husband and a father. I made a home. That's more than I ever thought I deserved. Sarah asked me the other day who her real father was. The statement hung in the air between them. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that a good man named Samuel Vance gave her life, and that I loved him very much, but that you're the man who saved her, who chose her, who's raised her every day since she was born. I told her she's lucky to have 2 fathers, one who gave her his blood and one who gives her everything else. How'd she take it? Eliza smiled. She said, Okay, Mama, can I go play now? I don't think it matters much to her. You're just Papa. That's all she needs to know. Smart kid. She gets it from both her fathers. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Not a threat, just a voice calling out into the night. I got a letter today, Eliza said eventually. When I was in town. From? Thomas. First time I've heard from him in 5 years. Rowan straightened, immediately alert. What did he want? Nothing, actually. He just wanted me to know that he's dying. Consumption. Has maybe a year left, according to his doctors. I'm sorry. Are you? Rowan considered the question honestly. I'm sorry for what could have been. For the brother-in-law who might have been family instead of an enemy. For Samuel losing a brother to greed. But I can't say I'm sorry he's dying after what he did to you. He asked to see Sarah before he dies. Said he wants to meet his niece, make his peace. And what do you want? Eliza was quiet for a long time. I want to say no. I want to protect our children from him, from that whole part of my life. But Sarah has a right to know where she comes from, the good and the bad. Then we'll take her, together. And if Thomas tries anything, he won't. He's dying, Rowan. Whatever fight he had in him is gone. He's just an old man trying to make his peace before the end. They made the journey 6 weeks later, leaving the younger children with Maggie at Caldwell's station while they took Sarah south to the ranch she'd been conceived on but never seen. The place had changed. Thomas had sold off most of the cattle, and the fields stood fallow. The house showed signs of neglect, paint peeling, porch sagging, windows dark. A hired nurse answered their knock and led them to a bedroom where Thomas Vance lay propped against pillows, a shadow of the man who'd tried to kill Eliza 5 years before. Eliza, he rasped, his voice barely audible. You came. I came. This is Sarah. Thomas's eyes moved to the little girl standing between her parents, her hand clasped tight in Rowan's. She stared back at the dying man with the fearless curiosity of childhood. You look like your father, Thomas said. Samuel would have loved you. I know, Sarah said simply. Mama tells me about him. I'm sure she does. Thomas's gaze shifted to Eliza. I was wrong. About everything. I let greed turn me into a monster, and I destroyed my own brother for land that's worthless without family to share it with. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. Eliza stood silent, warring emotions playing across her face. Finally, she spoke. I forgive you, Thomas. Not for your sake, but for mine. I won't carry your hatred anymore. I won't let what you did poison the life I've built. Thank you. Thomas's eyes closed briefly. The ranch. It's yours again. In my will. Everything I have goes to you and Sarah. It's not enough to make up for what I did, but it's all I can offer. I don't want it. Please, let me do this one thing right. If not for you, then for Sarah. It's her birthright. Sarah tugged on Eliza's hand. Mama, what's a birthright? It's something that belongs to you because of who your family was, Eliza explained gently. But I don't want a ranch. I want to go home, to our cabin with Papa and Sam and Emma and the twins. Out of the mouths of children came perfect truth. Eliza looked at Thomas and shook her head. Sell it. Use the money to pay for your care and donate whatever's left to the orphanage in town. Samuel would have liked that better than his daughter inheriting blood money. Thomas nodded weakly. As you wish. But Eliza, thank you for bringing her, for letting me see that something good survived my mistakes. They left soon after, Sarah chattering about the long ride home and whether the twins would remember her. In the wagon, with his daughter falling asleep against his shoulder, Rowan took Eliza's hand. That was generous of you, forgiving him. It wasn't generous, it was selfish. I'm tired of letting him occupy space in my head. This way he can die and I can truly move on. Do you think Sarah will ask questions about what happened? Probably, when she's older, and when she does, we'll tell her the truth, that people can do terrible things, but that doesn't mean we have to become terrible ourselves. We can choose something better. Think she'll understand? Eliza smiled, looking down at the sleeping child. She already does. She chose home over birthright without even thinking about it. She knows what matters. Thomas Vance died 3 months
This story
later.
was posted on the
The ranch
channel
was
west of
sold,
Betrayal.
and the money went to the
Please do not
orphanage as
repost
Eliza
it
had
in any
requested.
form.
A small notice in the newspaper marked his passing, but in the valley where the Hale family lived, it was barely remarked upon. Life continued its steady march forward. The children grew. Sarah became a voracious reader, teaching herself from whatever books they could acquire on trips to town. Samuel showed an aptitude for working with wood, crafting toys for his younger siblings with increasing skill. Emma was fearless, climbing trees and exploring the forest with a confidence that gave her parents equal parts pride and terror. The twins, as they grew, developed distinct personalities. Daniel quiet and thoughtful, James loud and adventurous. And through it all, Rowan and Eliza stood as the foundation, their love deepening with each passing year into something that felt less like romance and more like the bedrock of existence itself. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the porch as they had countless times before, watching their 5 children play in the meadow beyond the garden. Sarah was teaching Samuel how to fish in the river while Emma attempted to corral the twins, who'd discovered the joy of throwing rocks into the water. "We did it," Eliza said softly. "We actually did it. Built a life from nothing." "Not from nothing," Rowan corrected. "From everything. From pain and loss and determination and hope. From refusing to give up even when giving up was the only logical choice. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd walked away that day? If you'd seen the blood in the snow and just kept going?" "Every day," Rowan admitted. "And every day I thank whatever force in the universe kept my feet from moving. Because this," he gestured to the scene before them, "this is everything I never knew I wanted. Sarah's going to ask to go to school soon, real school, in town." "I know. It'll mean leaving here, at least partially, maybe getting a house in Caldwell Station for the winter months so the children can get proper education." "Would you want that?" Eliza considered. "Yes and no. I love this place, this isolation, but the children deserve opportunities we can't give them out here. Sarah's too smart to be limited by what we can teach her, and the others will be the same. So we adapt. Same way we've always adapted." Rowan pulled her close. "We'll figure it out, together." As if sensing the importance of the moment, Sarah looked back toward the cabin and waved, a huge smile on her face. Rowan and Eliza waved back, and the simple gesture contained everything that mattered: connection, family, love that transcended blood and circumstance. That night, after the children were all in bed and the cabin had settled into nighttime quiet, Rowan found himself unable to sleep. He slipped outside to the porch, breathing in the cool mountain air that still felt like freedom after all these years. Eliza joined him moments later, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how close we came to losing all this. About how many things had to go exactly right for us to end up here. If the Morrison brothers hadn't helped us, if the infection had been worse, if Thomas had pushed harder. But they did, and it wasn't, and he didn't," Eliza interrupted gently. "We're here because we fought for it, because we refused to let fear and pain define us. That's not luck, Rowan. That's choice. I spent 3 years in these mountains before I found you, convinced I was done with choosing, done with caring. Then I heard you moaning at the bottom of that ravine, and something in me snapped, or maybe it woke up. I still don't know which. Does it matter?" "No, I suppose it doesn't." He turned to face her fully. "I love you, Eliza Hale. I loved you when you were dying in my arms. I loved you when you were bringing our children into this world. And I'll love you when we're both too old to remember why we're sitting on this porch. That's the only truth that matters." Eliza kissed him then, slow and deep, a kiss that tasted of years and promises and future yet to come. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "My Marshall, my mountain man, my home." They stood together on the porch they'd built with their own hands, looking out over the valley that had become their sanctuary, and understood that this was what victory looked like. Not glory, not wealth, not fame, just peace, just family, just the quiet knowledge that they'd taken broken pieces and made them whole. 15 years after Rowan found Eliza at the bottom of Devil's Drop, a letter arrived at the cabin. It was from the territorial governor, forwarded through Caldwell Station and marked urgent. Rowan opened it with trepidation, fearing some new threat, some old ghost rising to haunt them. Instead, it was an offer. The territorial government was expanding its law enforcement, creating new marshal positions to cover the growing settlements in the mountain regions. Someone had remembered Rowan Hale's name, his reputation from before. They were offering him a position, not as an active marshal, but as a training instructor for new recruits. Good pay, regular hours, based out of the territorial capital, with time to go home between sessions. "What do you think?" Rowan asked Eliza after showing her the letter. She read it carefully, then looked up at their children. Sarah was 22 now, working as a teacher in Caldwell Station and courting a young doctor. Samuel was studying law in the capital, determined to bring justice to those who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. Emma, at 18, had shocked them all by becoming a deputy herself, following in Rowan's original footsteps. The twins, now 16, were still figuring out their paths, but showed promise in everything they tried. I think, Eliza said slowly, that we raise these children to make a difference in the world. And I think maybe it's time you showed them that you can still do the same. You'd be okay with me traveling, being gone for weeks at a time? Rowan, we survived you carrying me across mountains in winter. We survived childbirth in a cave, armed men hunting us, infection and fear, and everything in between. I think we can survive you teaching young men how to be better marshals than you were. I was a good marshal. You were a great marshal who forgot how to forgive himself. Maybe teaching others will help you remember that you did more good than harm in your career. So Rowan accepted the position, and for the next decade he traveled between the cabin and the capital, teaching new marshals the skills he'd honed over a lifetime. He taught them tracking and survival, but more importantly, he taught them compassion. How to see the people they were helping, not just the laws they were enforcing. How to recognize when the system failed and when humanity had to fill the gap. His students remembered him as the man who told them that being a marshal meant saving lives, not just catching criminals. The man who'd carried a dying pregnant woman across mountains because it was the right thing to do, then built a life with her that became legendary in the territory. When Rowan finally retired at 60, he returned to the cabin permanently. His hair had gone gray, his hands weren't quite as steady as they'd been, but his heart was full in ways it had never been during his first career. Eliza met him on the porch, gray in her own hair but still beautiful in the way that mattered to him. Behind her, grandchildren played in the meadow. Sarah's 3, Emma's 2, and Samuel's first on the way. "Welcome home," she said, and those 2 words contained everything. They sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their entire journey together. From the ravine to the cave, from the trading post to this cabin, from 2 broken people to a family that spanned generations. "Any regrets?" Eliza asked, her hand in his. Rowan thought about the pregnant woman who'd died all those years ago, about the guilt that had driven him into isolation, about the moment he'd almost walked away from Eliza's broken body at the bottom of Devil's Drop. "Just one," he said finally. "What's that?" "That it took me so long to find you. Think of all the years we could have had if I'd found you sooner. But then we wouldn't be who we are. The pain made us ready for each other, made us strong enough to build this." She was right, of course. She usually was. On a summer evening 3 years later, when Rowan was 63 and Eliza 61, they sat on their porch for the last time together. Rowan had been feeling unwell for weeks, and the doctor from town had confirmed what they both suspected. His heart was giving out. There was nothing to be done except make peace with what time remained. "I'm not afraid," Rowan said, Eliza's hand clasped in his. "Good. You shouldn't be. You've lived a full life, a good life." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to us both." She kissed his weathered cheek. "You saved me in that ravine, Rowan. But I saved you too. We saved each other. We did, didn't we?" The children came to say goodbye. All 5 of them, grown now with families of their own. Sarah held his hand and thanked him for being the father she'd needed. Samuel promised to continue fighting for justice the way Rowan had taught him. Emma swore she'd make him proud in her work as a marshal. The twins, less verbal but no less loving, simply hugged him and told him they loved him. After they'd gone, leaving their parents alone under the stars, Eliza held Rowan close and felt his breathing slow, steady, peaceful. "I'll see you soon," she whispered. "Wait for me on the other side." "Always," he murmured, his voice fading.
This story was
Always
posted on the
waiting.
channel west of
"Always
Betrayal.
loving you."
Please do not
His last
repost
breath
it
came
in
with
any
the
form.
dawn, gentle as a sigh, and Eliza sat with him as the sun rose over the mountains that had been their salvation and their home. She lived another 7 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of the love story that had started in blood and desperation and transformed into something eternal. She told them the story often, how their grandfather had found their grandmother dying in the snow, how he'd refused to give up on her, how they'd built a life from nothing but determination and hope. When her own time came, Eliza went peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face like she was greeting an old friend. They buried her next to Rowan on the hill overlooking the valley, and Sarah, now in her 50s and a grandmother herself, read from a journal her mother had kept all those years. "We were two broken people," Sarah read, her voice steady despite her tears. "Shattered by loss and pain and circumstances beyond our control. The world told us we were done, finished, that survival was the best we could hope for. But we chose something different. We chose each other. We chose hope. And from that choice, we built something beautiful. A family, a legacy. Proof that broken things, when mended with love, become stronger than they ever were before." The family gathered on that hillside, 3 generations of them, all born from the impossible love of 2 people who'd refused to quit. They told stories, shared memories, and celebrated lives well lived. And in the cabin down the hill, now maintained as a family retreat and memorial, the porch stood empty but not abandoned. It waited for the next generation to sit on its weathered boards, to watch the sun set over the same mountains, to understand that some stories transcend the people who lived them. The story of Rowan and Eliza became legend in the territory. Parents told it to their children as a tale of courage and perseverance. The Territorial Marshal Service taught it to new recruits as an example of humanity in law enforcement. And in the valley where it all happened, the Hale family continued to thrive, each generation adding to the foundation those 2 broken people had laid so long ago. Because that's what love does. It builds, it endures, it transforms death into life, despair into hope, loneliness into family. Rowan Hale came to the mountains to die. But in a ravine at the edge of nowhere, he found Eliza Vance, and together they learned to live again. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.